Hello and welcome to RJ Sanderson TV. It's our May edition and Roy and I, we're both bleary-eyed after sitting up and watching the federal budget last night. Roy, we've got plenty to discuss. How are you today?
Yeah, not too bad. It was a late night, putting it all together, listening to what's been said and what's been announced. It's been pretty good.
I think one of the interesting parts of the budget, and we'll get to the details in a moment, was how much of it we actually already knew before last night.
It was quite a bit, wasn't it?
A lot of it was sort of recap, but there were some interesting details which we're going to get to. And before we do get to that as well, Roy, there's something special coming at the end of the show, an accommodation voucher that you will not want to miss. So stick around for that one because it might be something that you can take advantage of. But let's get into the budget because it is the biggest topic in our news headlines today. And the first slide that we see here is seemingly losing its relevance in terms of how much more relevant it's been historically. This is effectively the side that talks about how big the deficit or surplus was. Last night, the government announced that the 23-24 budget would be in surplus, $9.3 billion. It's back-to-back surpluses, but there's still a lot of economic uncertainty out there. And Roy, I pose to you this question. Is the electorate more interested in surpluses or in interest rates?
I actually think they're more interested in interest rates. I don't know if they're so concerned anymore about what the surplus or is or isn't. But the concern about that is, although we've got a surplus in what they say is an election budget, we're going to have deficits of $112.8 billion over the next number of years. And that's pretty extraordinary to say, it's okay, we're going to make some money this year, but we're going to lose money for the next very many years.
It is, and I think, again, to that theme of budgets not really announcing anything new, the intergenerational report that we've talked about on this show before actually suggested 40 consecutive budget deficits. So this is not new, the idea that we've got deficits, but it's certainly something that governments need to address and need to think about and consider because of the growing interest payments on debt that continue to affect economies.
And sorry, Dave, but like any business, a government, whether it's state or federal, needs to consider what they earn and what they spend. Because if they keep spending more than what they earn, that's an ongoing problem.
The other thing that could be an ongoing problem is flat GDP growth, which is what the government has budgeted for. You can see there that the budgeted growth for 25-26 looks like it's going to be less than 2%. So again, the target on growth is usually up around the 3 to 4%. You want to be able to grow. One of the hindrance to growth at the moment is probably global uncertainty, but another one is not wanting to stimulate the economy too much because that can be inflationary.
We don't want inflation. It's a balancing item, and we certainly don't want to have it going into negative because that would be worse. That would be worse again.
You mentioned inflation, and I think that it's pretty clear that the next election is effectively looking like it is going to be a referendum on this graph, this rate, the inflation rate. It has been crippling for people. You can see that that big spike towards the end of that graph that we've seen over the last couple of years, 21, 22, 23. Inflation is on the way down, but it's still not within that target range, Roy.
But it's certainly heading in the right direction. Currently 3.6%. That's why I had said last month, I don't expect interest rates to go up again because we are tracking in the right direction. We've just got to keep doing that.
The other graph that is interesting is the government's prediction for headline inflation. You can see there, they've also highlighted that 2 to 3% range there. It's a bit of an interesting graph. Now, this comes directly from the budget papers. So, yes, they are kind of suggesting that it will continue to go down. The timeline on that is not perhaps made super clear in that graph. But really, I think how it looks in the broader political landscape is that there's going to be an election called in the next 12 months. Interest rates have been on pause. when we sat down here last time, there was potential that people were talking about potentially interest rates still might, they still may go up. The consensus in the community is that they need to come down and provide relief for homeowners, which is exactly why this budget needed to be mindful of this rate, because it is such an area of public interest at the moment.
Yes, and this differs to the Reserve Bank predictions. The Reserve Bank, prior to the budget, had a lot of uncertainty, and right at the moment, the budget has actually suggested that interest rates will come down quicker than the Reserve Bank think they will.
As many of you will already be aware, interest rates did remain on hold. We won't spend too much time on this, but you made an interesting point there, Roy. Basically, fiscal and monetary policy are at odds with each other. The government, as we're going to mention now, that one of the centrepieces of this budget was the stage 3 tax cuts, which is going to provide relief for a lot of people. But the question is it going to be inflationary? The answer is yes, it will be to some point. How are they going to bring other pieces down is perhaps the countering question. Yeah, you can sort of see that fiscal policy and monetary policy are now in opposition to each other. And it's a delicate balancing act because, as we said, the idea that the government has delivered a surplus is now less valuable to the electorate than knowing that their interest rate and their home loan rate is going to come down if the government manages inflation.
Yeah, I think you nailed it earlier. I think the critical point is interest rates, and that's what the election's going to be based on.
Let's have a look at the stage 3 tax cuts in more detail, Roy, because I think this is something that, when you go to the RJ Sanderson office, you'll probably start to see this. What would you say, from August, September onwards, that people will start to notice that their pay has significantly increased week on week.
So people are going to have more money in their pay packet. This was put up as a budget announcement, but this was announced a long time ago. So it's not really something new out of the budget. The big question is, will this extra money in our pay packet cause inflationary pressure, which, if we have inflationary pressure, we have pressure for interest rates to go up. That's the conundrum that the government have. But these were announced so long ago, they certainly couldn't back away from those tax cuts.
And as you say, everyone will have more money in their pockets as the tax cuts suggest. So the way that it looks for in this next chart for people is that anyone earning over $18,000 a year gets a tax cut. So you can see there that anywhere between $804 and almost $5,000 or $4,500 is the tax relief that taxpayers who earn over $18,000 a year will get.
So once you pick where you are in that slide, you should then think about, what am I going to do with the money? Am I going to spend it on goods and services, and that will add to inflation? Or am I going to reduce debt? Or am I going to save it for a rainy day? They're the decisions that people will make come July onwards as to what they're going to do with that little bit of extra money they're going to have every week.
I think the government also banking on very flat retail sales at the moment. So people at the moment, it's quite a historical anomaly actually, Roy, are not spending on retail. So any money they're getting at the moment, they're socking away. If that trend changes, inflation will go up. The government is banking on this being these tax cuts being used moderately. They're not thinking that people will go out and spend it all. And I think the other point is that, as you know, the tax cuts are effectively going to be realised over an entire year. So if the election is called earlier in that cycle, perhaps it doesn't have the time to set in. People might be sort of saving for the whole year to afford a big ticket item, which won't hit the inflation rate till potentially after the election.
Yes, it'll be interesting to see when we get down to the pointy end of this year, December, what interest rates, what we've done with our money and what effect that's had on retail sales and therefore inflation and therefore interest rates. It's going to be an interesting year.
Winners and losers in any budget, with and this one no exception. Roy, here's your winners.
Yeah, well, the stage 3 cuts that's announced a long time ago. The big one was the energy rebate of $300. We didn't know about that, so that was a great surprise. Rent assistance going up at $70 per couple. Crisis support for people trying to get out of abusive relationships, that's $5,000 for those. Students, this was announced some weeks ago, they're changing how they calculate the increase in the HECS debt. Instead of using CPI, they'll use the lower of CPI or WPI, which ties back to wages. The winner's job seeker. If you're on job seeker and working less than 14 hours, you're going to make another $54.90. So I think all these and energy rebate for small business at $325, an extra $25 for a business compared to a household. I'm surprised at that. And, you know, some other good things in there that I think are all winners on the federal budget.
And there, of course, you can't have winners without having losers.
Yeah, so live sheep exports will cease from the 1st of May 2028. Migration's going to halve to around 260,000. Now, I know that you're a loser if you're a migrant coming to Australia, but the reality is we've been calling for that for a while because our population growth is too high. So that's a good thing in my opinion. And international students are going to be capped. NDIS, we know that there's been a fair bit of overclaiming. I don't want to use the word fraud, but they are going to spend money on fraud detection. And job seeker, we said a moment ago that if you're earning, if you're working a very small number of hours, but that only affects 0.6% of those on job seeker. So 99% got no increase at all. So that's pretty disappointing.
Roy, you mentioned that the big announcement that came last night was the energy and bill relief that will apply to households and small businesses. Now, the question on everyone's mind is, well, hang on a sec. If we're in an inflationary environment, how is giving everyone an energy bonus not going to create inflation? Now, this is where the nuance of this policy is quite important. This is actually a rebate or subsidy that is applied to your energy bill. You don't actually get the cash. It's not like other ones where you get the rebate in your hand. It's a subsidy. So what that means is that it actually brings the retail price of your energy down, which is quite interesting because what that means is that when the CPI is measured or when these inflation rates are measured, the actual price that adds and contributes to that basket of goods is lower. So the government and Treasury is banking on the idea that this piece of policy will actually bring the inflation rate down while simultaneously providing cost of living support to households and small businesses.
And that's brilliant in this policy because had they just given us cash of $300, we could go out and buy a TV with it or spend it on retail. But it's just coming off our bill, which is going to have a direct link back to the inflation rate. I think it's quite a good policy.
It's a very interesting one, and as we've said on several occasions, it's likely going to decide the future of the government at the next election and whether people judge this government to have been successful in navigating what has been a turbulent time for Australians with the cost of living crisis.
So I rate the budget probably a 7 out of 10, Dave. But I think the real decision will be near the end of this year and the effect on inflation and the effect on interest rates. So I think watch this space to see if it's been a winner or a good or a bad budget.
Another budget that has been recently delivered is the Victorian state budget, Roy, and you got some winners and losers from that one as well.
Yeah, the main items were families with school children are going to have a $400 school bonus just to assist with cost of living. There's a fair bit of money being spent on education. First home buyers have an extension of the grants. There's a good thing for business. The payroll tax threshold is being increased and been calling out for that for a while. The losers, casual and contractors sick pay, that's being abandoned completely. And I think that's a good thing because casuals and contractors get additional hourly rates to cover sick pay. And I don't believe our taxes should also be giving them sick pay. Airport rail delayed for 4 years. Number of health projects have been scrapped. Free kindergarten, which was a previous budget announcement, has been pushed back to 2036. The worst thing I think about this whole thing is we've tried to cut some projects and save some dollars, but our debt level is going to increase from the current 156 billion to 188 billion. And again, what I said earlier is governments need to think about what they earn and what they spend. And in Victoria, we still haven't got the balance right, unfortunately.
Yeah, the government sort of trying to manage the narrative there by saying that the percentage of debt to gross state product has remained stable, but I think, yeah, the raw numbers don't lie in that. The debt is going up, and it's certainly an area of concern for a lot of Victorians. Again, one of those ones that I'm sure you'll talk to further in the program. Roy, as we always do, we like to look at some of the retail investment options out there for everyone, starting with the stock market. What's the stock market been like over the last 12 months?
Last 12 months, 6.8%, but back in our last show in late October, we can see it dipped over the last 12 months. I predicted boldly that we'd have a 15% return. We're on track to that. Top left corner, I put a little arrow at the 8,000 mark. I believe by the end of the year we will surpass the $8,000 mark, and I would strongly suggest that if you're thinking about getting into the stock market, reach out to a wealth management team. We have a wealth management team, but if it's not us, somebody, get some advice on the best quality stocks out there to buy, because I still think there's a lot of upside in the stock market.
It's interesting on this chart, Roy. When we sat here this time last month, we were sort of days out from a major correction, which you can see the losses from which we've basically already recovered in May. So it's
correct,
back on the way up.
Yep, back on the way up.
Home value index for the last month, Roy, has some interesting data there. The one that sticks out like a sore thumb is the one in negative territory. It's Melbourne.
Yeah, Melbourne, and I think this is just 1 month, by the way. We have property investors leaving in droves in Victoria. That's mostly because of land tax and a lot of commentary around land tax. So if you look at the annual change, Victoria, or Melbourne, I should say, has a very small increase, one of the lowest. I actually think with over the next 12 months, investors will have already left the market. Rents are going up, and I think we will turn full circle and we'll have investors coming back into the market. So if you want to be bold, I think the next 6 months or so is the time to start looking at property. And also Hobart, negative. There's going to be a football stadium in Hobart that's going to add a lot of demand to the local area. They're going to need more housing. A lot more people are going to live there. There's going to be football players. There's going to be housing required for supporters and visitors. So I actually think if you want to be bold, I'd be looking at Hobart at this point in time as well. And
the other thing that is necessary when making a decision to invest in property is the rental yield and what rent looks like. What can you tell us about this?
Yeah, have a look at Hobart. Negative. It's one of the reasons the prices are dropping. But as I said, once we have a football stadium and once we have more people there, I think there'll be pressure on Hobart rents to go up. And Melbourne mostly going up, and that's because of the apartment market mostly, simply because of the population growth and immigration that's been coming into the Melbourne, Melbourne are getting the lion's share of immigration across all Australia. So that's pushing that up.
Right. Special time in the program, as always, because it's time for your segment, Roy. Roy's Rage. Where are we going with this one this week, Roy?
Well, we have a housing crisis, and it's quite clearly a housing crisis that it's got the writing on the wall, and I can't understand why the government don't see this and are taking different actions. I know the budget talked about spending more money on government housing, but that's not what we need. We've been driving property investors out of the Victorian market, and Victoria's market's worse than any. We abandoned depreciation benefits in 2017. We've increased immigration, we've increased rent, there's supply shortages, and it will force house prices to increase, which is what I was saying just a moment ago. So what I think we need to do is we need to bring back incentives for property investors, bring them back to the market. And I think that might happen in time, but the government are not putting incentives in place because we have no depreciation, we have compliance costs are through the roof, and we need to address this and try and get property investors back to the market.
The interesting one there that you mentioned was immigration as well, Roy, because it's a national topic, and if the states are not aligned on that, then there is problems that can contribute to this market. The federal government did announce that they want to make some changes to immigration, which may positively affect supply as well, and may bring some of those investors back to the market.
Yep, I agree. Now, Dave, I've been doing the Roy's Rage segment now for some 5 years. I put the heat on you during the month and said, you need to come up with your own segment, something that has a little bit of spice to it. So let me know, what have you come up with?
Some won't like this, some will find it controversial, but it's time for the first edition of 50 Shades of DK. And I start by saying this, Roy. One of the unfortunate hallmarks of 21st century politics is a growing reluctance from government to take risks and table meaningful and tangible ideas. Public discourse largely centres on moral and philosophical issues, and it sometimes moves to how change can be made incrementally. But this despite the fact that in many instances it is abundantly clear that transformational change is required. Politicians in Australia will argue that it's hard to make transformational change with a 3-year election cycle and widespread uncertainty globally. It is for this reason that I applaud the government's Future Made in Australia policy announcement last night. Now, I don't profess to be an expert in the detail and minutiae that makes up this policy, but what I do recognise, Roy, is that the government has tabled a tangible and clear idea about a pathway forward for the country and for future generations of Australians. It also addresses a concern that I'm passionate about and have brought up on many occasions on this show in the past. Economic complexity is defined as a holistic measure of the productive capabilities of large economic systems, usually cities, regions or countries. It is important because without it, a nation must rely solely on its natural resources, which we know are finite. Australia has ridden a commodities boom for many years, and this boom has allowed generations of Australians to prosper. But this boom will end, and as you'll note from the following chart, Australia has done nothing to build a competitive advantage in any other space. Australia now ranks 93rd on the Economic Complexity Index after a sustained decline since the turn of the century. This puts Australia one place behind Uganda and well behind other developed nations we like to compare ourselves to. The announcement last night seeks to address this issue with some calculated risk-taking. In a world of uncertainty, investment in clean energy production makes sense, given it is now virtually universally uncontested that the world must transition to cleaner options. Investment in high tech also makes sense. It hardly seems likely that the world will transition to a less tech-oriented model. So credit to the government for effectively putting an idea forward to the electorate and to the parliament about what the future in Australia could look like. The opposition has already begun debating the structure of the tax incentives that underpin the policy, and this is something I also welcome. Any constructive and pragmatic debate about the future of Australia is a welcome debate in my book.
Bang, nailed it.
What do you
well
reckon,
done.
Roy?
Pretty good.
Will it get a run next month?
It should, yes.
Well, I'm glad that I've got your approval, and I welcome anyone else's thoughts. You can always have your say. I'm keen to have those debates, but I think, as I've mentioned, it's an idea, it's out there, and the debate is happening. Let's change pace and have a look at some tax tips now, Roy. And we start with the First Home Super Saver Scheme. It is an interesting one, this one, that perhaps doesn't have the visibility that it should because there's a nice incentive there for some.
Yeah, and I'm bringing this to the forefront because I don't think a lot of people know about it. Having said that, 13,300 people did get money out of their super fund for their first home in the last 12 months, or up in 2023. So the rules are, you just put money into your super fund, pre or post tax, as a voluntary contribution. It just means you can draw it back later when you want to buy a house up to $15,000. It's got to be your first house, you've got to be over 18, and you've got to live in it for 6 months. So this is all positive stuff. So what this opens the door for is if you have little Johnny who's, 18, 19, and you want to give him a couple of hundred or a couple of thousand to help save for a house, what we would generally do is just put it into a bank account and allow him to save it. But then when it's in that bank account, he might decide to go and spend it on something else, like maybe a car, or pay off his HECS debt. But if it's in super, it must stay in super, and he can draw out up to $15,000 per year to buy his first home, his or her first home. The key point, though, to remember is that you must apply for that money to come out of superannuation before you sign the building contract. Don't sign the building contract then thinking you can get your money out of super. So I think there's a real incentive here for people to save for their first home by using their super fund.
Interesting one. Another interesting one is the tax incentive for gifting employees voucher. Now, we like this. We like a free gift as an employee. Right?
Yeah, so this is probably a message for all employers. If you're sitting there with team members, staff members, you can give them a voucher up to $299, which will be tax-free to the staff member, and you, as the employer, get a tax deduction for it, and you don't have to pay superannuation on it, you don't have to pay work cover or payroll tax on it, and you don't pay fringe benefits tax. So it's a win-win situation. So bonuses before June 30, anything up to $299, and vouchers can be Coles, Bunnings, Myer, Village Roadshow, or my favourite, Dan Murphy's. As long as it's not cash.
Don't mind that, Dan Murphy's. And I don't mind this question that has come in during the month, Roy. This is a perler, this question.
A legit question.
I want to claim my dog and cat as they are my way of coping with stress at work. They are calming. They are my calming influence in a very hectic work environment. Can I claim my pets as tax deductions?
What do you think, Trainee Dave?
Surely a yes.
Surely. I'm afraid no.
Oh.
So I will say this person was new to Australia, hadn't done a lot of tax returns in Australia, but it was a genuine question I had this week that I thought I need to share with you because I think it's she'd gone out on a limb and went, maybe I could claim my pets because they do keep me calm in a hectic work environment.
Maybe, maybe there's a sort of piece of stationery or something that you could buy that you could claim that helps with the stressful environment. I don't know what the alternative would be to pets, but probably looks fairly different to dogs and cats, you'd think. Roy, I mentioned off the top that you've got a great offer for people out there. Talk us through this accommodation voucher offer.
So we are giving away a $1,000 accommodation voucher to any company, family trust or self-managed super fund that shifts from their current accountant or advisor to RJS in May or June. It's valued at $1,000 and it's tax-free. So all you need to do is email us, go to our website, the conditions are there. We don't add it to your fees. We charge our normal fees, but you're going to get a $1,000 accommodation voucher, limited time offer. So jump on board. I think that's something very unique to the industry.
Yeah, good. And then you, of course, get the added benefits of the great team at RJ Sanderson. Roy, it's been a blockbuster edition of RJS TV for this month. Looking forward to seeing how the budget sits with the electorate as we start to, and the community, as we start to, see the narrative spread and see people's reactions. Any predictions ahead of our June edition?
I actually think the budget won't have too much inflationary impact, and I am predicting that interest rates will be fairly flat until the end of the year. I know we had a major bank come out and make an announcement that there'll be 3 increases between now and Christmas. That was since our last show. I dispute that. I actually think that was just a media stunt to get their name at the front pages. It was shock value. I really think that the interest rates will not go up. I think they'll stay stable. And if there's anything that is going to happen, I think there'll be more downward pressure than upward pressure.
Well, as I said, a blockbuster edition of RJ Sanderson TV. Thank you for watching. We look forward to your company next time.